Okay, well, it looks like we've kind of stabilized on people trying to get in. Obviously, people may join later. But first, I wanted to thank you all for coming. This is, and for being able to make it to our first community meeting regarding Broadway Park. My name is Craig Nicholson. I'm with Justice Start, and with me today are Liz Marsh, the project manager for Justice Start, as well as Mark Boyes-Watson, our architect on the project. Tonight, we're going to spend a little bit of time introducing you to Justice Start, just in case you don't know who we are. Then go into our goals for the projects, along with the challenges we'll face with this site and the process itself. After that, we'll get into our current thoughts on the design of the building, and then we'll finish up with some information regarding the next steps and timing for the project, as well as a Q&A session. Forgot to click through to the agenda so you could see that as I was speaking. Sorry about that. Justice Start's a nonprofit community development corporation that's been a part of Cambridge and this neighborhood for over 50 years. We believe in an equitable community where everyone can secure a solid economic foundation. And with all of the uproar going on regarding Black Lives Matter and the indication of the long-term systemic effects of redlining, we realize that historically this really hasn't been available to everyone. So it's become our mission, and actually has been for quite some time, to promote equity by creating access to stable housing and building pathways to economic opportunity. So that's marketing speak. So how does that really translate into the actual work that we do at Justice Start? Well, on the stable housing side, we build, manage, and preserve affordable housing with over 600 units in our rental portfolio, and we've built more than 100 condominiums in the history of our organization. In addition to this, we also help keep people in their homes through our home improvement program, as well as our housing stabilization, where we're providing mediation services and preventing evictions. We also provide programs free of charge to low and moderate income individuals in the areas that are fueling the dynamic growth of Cambridge. Through our adult programs, we have biomedical and IT programs, which again are those key industries that really are driving Cambridge. And in our youth programs, which were the initial programs that we started with back in 1968, we educate at-risk teens where traditional high schools haven't been a good fit. We provide them with a high school equivalency and everyday job skills in the areas of construction and retail customer service. So given our mission, why would we choose this site for additional housing? Well, as people that are in Cambridge, I'm sure you understand that property values these days are really high, crazy high. And there hasn't been any new affordable home ownership projects in Cambridge for at least 10 years, if not longer. There's been rental projects, additional units in that area, but for home ownership, which is a key component of kind of the housing cycle, life cycle, there really hasn't been anything new in quite some time. And Justice Start owns this land. So with those crazy prices and the desire to do the home ownership project, this really does allow us to donate the land and remove that cost from the equation. So while we're saying affordable housing, you might say, what exactly does that mean? So affordable housing has a wide range of income levels and thoughts and ideas behind it. For home ownership projects, we tend to look at the higher end of the affordability spectrum. And this provides us with an ability of getting people in there that are able to be stable and understand and handle the components and the needs of owning a home as opposed to renting. And by doing home ownership projects, this provides us a path where individuals and families that are ready to move beyond rental housing can move into a home ownership unit and open up those other units for people that do need affordable housing. Also, the prices for these permanently affordable homes are based on a formula that ensures the housing and the people that own them will not be cost burdened by their mortgage payments, condo fees, property taxes, and insurance. And to give you a sense as to what this type of affordability means in terms of real people, a 2-income family that would be able to afford and qualify for one of these would be made up of people that work as, for example, a preschool teacher or a paramedic. A single income family with 2 kids is someone like a police officer. So these are people that are worthwhile neighbors. They're pillars of the community. They really do provide something rather than just a neighbor at the end of the day. So the goals of this site and the goals of what Justice Start's trying to accomplish. We really are trying to expand the home ownership opportunities in Cambridge, which is really that concept of that continuation of housing options. However, since these aren't necessarily in any order, I do want to talk about the climate and resiliency aspects. The building that we've proposed would be designed to Passive House certification, which is a really rigorous standard in terms of energy efficiency and healthy living. This focus on climate and resiliency also informs our desire to protect the existing street trees. Those are mature trees, they're valuable for the area. We fully understand the health benefits that they create by providing shade and cooling the area, as well as the carbon capture that mature trees are able to do. So we'll do everything we can to protect those. We'll work with the city arborist, make sure there's an approved pruning plan, as well as a protection plan while the building's under construction. Now, with every site, there's challenges. A big one for us is the need to preserve as much parking as we can for the residents of the George Close building that currently use this site. And we've designed a plan that ensures that everyone that currently parks at that site will have parking not only during construction, but after construction. Another challenge we have is that we have multiple contexts of the built environment to play off within the neighborhood. We have the masonry structures of the Fletcher Maynard Academy and the George Close building. The George Close building, which stands 75 feet tall on opposite corners. But then we abut the entry of the Green Rose Park that has no building on it. And from there, we have the houses that stretch out to the south, where their heights can reach up to 35 feet. Each of these drive a certain aesthetic in the neighborhood, and not all of them agree with each other. So I think the idea here is that we have an opportunity to create some value in building affordable housing, to create homes for people, and to bring a diversity and a stability into the neighborhood. And with the teaser that I talked about in terms of the design aesthetics and what we're trying to accomplish, I'm going to hand it over to Mark Boyce-Watson to walk you through where we are so far. Mark?
Great. Thanks, Craig. Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry we're in this format and not a more intimate format, but we do what we can, and I'll try to be clear and succinct and not mumble in my normal manner. So the site here at the corner of Broadway and Windsor is an interesting one, because you have the Fletcher Maynard Academy and the Close building, and a pair of parking lots on the opposite corners. So from an urban design point of view, the site is pretty raw. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that this is, so the corner that we're on is that corner next to the park. And right now it's just a parking lot. So you have these strong, if we go to the next slide, you have these strong urban design, urban buildings of both the school and the Close building on the other two corners. So what that presupposes is that this is one of the primary crossings of Broadway, Broadway and Windsor. So from an urban design point of view, it's a very appropriate place to get a building. So, and the building that we're proposing pretty much takes up the corner lot and holds it in a similar way to the way that the close building to the north west and the school building to the southwest hold it. And in fact, if you look up and down Windsor Street, you see that that street also is well held. It's a much more intimate street. So we have two kind of streets. We have Broadway, which is broader in its nature, and up and down Broadway, obviously, as you're familiar, as you go towards Kendall, the buildings get very big. And it goes through sections of historic buildings, sections of buildings that were built in the 60s at quite big scales, and then all the way into Harvard Square. So this little moment, though, at Windsor at Broadway is the one that we are trying to understand as we design our building. And if we go to the next slide, you can see this is just like, what this is a view. It's as if you were to cut along the street and, you know, let's say you're in Google Street View and you're walking down the street and you see the visual context that we're in. So if I go right to left, you're sort of walking down Broadway and you can see the school on the corner of Windsor with its curved front. And then our building is the building that's on the left of that. That's a proposed building. So where the parking lot now is, just to the right of that white van, is the proposed building. Just ever so slightly lower than the school, and significantly less high than the close building, which I think is around 71 feet high. So sort of a scale of the adjacent buildings, but slightly smaller. And then as you go down Broadway towards Kendall, you're seeing, you know, the entrances, you know, to the Green Rose Heritage Park. So, which is an important part of the urban context of the building, because that, you know, as I know all of you in the neighborhood know, was created fairly recently, you know, in the last 10 to 15 years, and provides a really, really important piece of open space with both recreational and passive functions and playground for the community. So that's immediately adjacent to this site. And in fact, the entrance to it is a fairly passive space, actually, and the more active spaces are behind in the bigger area. So our building benefits from the two streets it's on and the presence of the park. And then if we go to the next slide, these are just some views to show, hopefully, you know, reinforcing what the description that I gave. So here we are looking towards Kendall Square. We have because Justice owns the building on the left, the close building. So you have on the building on the left, the existing building is the close building. On the right is the Fletcher Maynard Academy. And our building proposed is the one that's kitty corner, you know, as it were, the focus of the middle of the slide, and it's sitting on that far corner of Windsor Street. If we take the next slide, we're going to take a view looking the other way. So here you can see the context of Broadway. So this time we're turning and we're looking west along Broadway, and the building, that's the facade of the building facing the little neck of the park that comes out to meet Broadway. And the last slide in this sequence is looking south along Windsor Street. And actually, as you can see illustrated, Windsor Street actually is rather beautiful in its sensibility, in the sense that the buildings hold the street and create actually a slower moving, as we know, anybody who drives there, it's got a different feel, very different feel from Broadway, and a certain amount of intimacy. But really the interesting thing from an urban design point of view is that the way those buildings hold the street, and you can see in this image. So we've superimposed then in the sort of focal point between the trees is the new building proposed. You can see it on the other side of Broadway. So if you're looking down the street between the trees, it's holding that corner of Broadway and Windsor. So, and I'll just quickly describe how the building's configured. It's not a complicated building. It's a small building in its footprint. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to walk up the different levels of the actual plan so that you can see what is proposed. So there's an existing entrance to the parking lot on Broadway. And the plan is to narrow that slightly, but keep it in exactly the same place. And the parking, there is, in order to preserve that close parking for the close building, you can see that there is parking at this first level. It's at grade. But you can also see that the building on Windsor is set back to allow a series of plantings along the street edge. And the entrance and the lobby to the new housing, the new condominium housing, is also on the corner, providing lighting and windows and a sense of life on that corner. But the entrance moves slightly off the corner so as to not have congestion of pedestrians at that corner itself, caused by the building. So in the next level, so just to orient everybody, because I always forget to do that. So basically Broadway is at the top of the page. Windsor is going up and down on the left. You can see those street trees illustrated. The park is where Craig's cursor is, over there, over the right-hand side. So we go to the next slide, we'll go up to the next floor up. And this is actually the typical floor. So the building is designed to be, you know, family friendly. We have over a quarter of the units in the building, 15 units proposed, are 3-bedroom units. And the building has on a typical floor, has 4 units per floor. So, and you can see the kind of layout there. And I think it's important to point out that the building fills out its site in order to get you know, everything in there. But the units are blessed with really lovely windows, and they should be pretty nice when they're completed. So if we go on up, on the top floor, there's actually an accessible unit, an additional storage for all of the unit owners. And you can also see that at the bottom of the page, again, each of these are oriented the same. So Windsor is always on your left, Broadway is always at the top of the page. The building steps back a little bit, deferring away from the neighbor's house on Windsor Street. And then if we go up one more level, just to pick up on what Craig was saying, the building is going to be built to the Passif House, which was originally a very forward-looking, and it's been around for a while, way of building. Pretty much, when people would think of it more like a net zero type concept, very, very low energy consumption, healthy living for single family houses. But more recently, Passif House has broadened its ideas and broadened its systemic thinking about how to conserve energy and promote health, and has come out with a standard for multifamily buildings, to which Justice Star has committed to building. So this will be a very interesting, pioneering project from an energy point of view. And what you're seeing illustrated on this top floor, this roof plan is some photovoltaics that help offset some of the common area usages in the building in general. And then I've just got some illustrations of how that pans out when we look at the facades of the building. So if we click to the next slide, I'm just going to walk you around the building just so that we get a sense of what it is. So here I'm starting at Windsor, and I'm going to do a clockwise walk around the building. So this is the facade on Windsor Street. And you can see that the design features are, we have a distinctive base to the building, housing the lobby and the parking, and then you can see that area for those plantings along that street edge. And then the body of 3 floors of housing, and then the top floor is treated as an attic story, just architectonically. And we're early on in terms of developing the exact facade language, but you can see the generality of the massing and how it's put together. And as we walk around, actually, oddly, the building is almost square, so these elevations are going to look fairly the same. But just to point one more thing out on this, this facade, the facade facing, as I said, Windsor Street, is you can see that the building sets back on that top floor, which is actually on the north of the abutting Windsor neighbor. But then we go, and if we walk to the next slide, we'll see the facade as it faces Broadway. And you can see the same language basically being used there. So, you know, typically when you see those triple windows, you're looking at one of the living rooms of the new condominium apartments. So they're moving around again. As I said, the building is nearly square, so there's some similarity between these elevations. Here you are looking at the view of the building from the park, and you can see the same language is being used. And then if we flip around to the last of the elevations with less windows, is the elevation as it faces basically south, which is closest to the abutter on Windsor Street. In this illustration, you can also see that uncovered the photovoltaic panels on the roof. So I think with that, I'm gonna, since we can't do live questions and I can't see anybody, I'm gonna hand that back to Craig.
Thanks, Mark. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. The steps that are listed here are not exactly detailed, but just to give you a sense that there's plenty of time for us to continue this process. You know, if you follow these steps through, if everything goes to plan, we would be in construction essentially a year from now. We'll have additional community meetings. We'll be continuing to have conversations outside of those with city planning staff, with neighbors. We'll have the official city meetings with the planning board and zoning board. So, you know, again, the main message in this, in terms of next steps and timing, is that there's lots of time to continue this conversation. And that second community meeting, we don't have a date set for it. You know, if looking at the fact that we're here on the 25th, it won't be most likely until towards the end of September. But really, the plan there is to take the feedback we get tonight, you know, look at what is and isn't possible and what we can do to accommodate some of those feedback points or enhance some of the communication as to why something has to be a certain way, and then come back to you and discuss a little bit more about where the design has gone and what we've been able to do. And with that, actually, I'll one more thing. In addition to the meetings and the things shown on the previous slide, go back there. The website itself, the Co-Urbanize website, which is www.courb.co/BP for Broadway Park. That has ways to post questions, to respond to other people's questions, we'll have surveys and polls up there like we did about what time would be the best for this meeting. And that is going to be a hub of information for the project itself. And you know, announcements about upcoming meetings and things like that will also be posted there. So that's a good way to continue the communication and the dialogue for the project as well. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. Just a kind of preview as to how that works. If you'd like to ask a question, you can click on the Q&A box button at the bottom of your screen, type in your question and hit send. The panelists will be able to see the questions, but other attendees will not. You can submit a question at any time. I think I already see that one's been submitted. So good for you, whoever was the first one there. I haven't seen it yet. But if we, by chance, run out of time in terms of answering questions by 8 o'clock, we don't get to them all, we will take those questions down since they're all written in and respond to them. We'll also be posting a recording of this presentation up on the Co-Urbanize website. So with that, we will move on to questions. All right, so the first question I have is from Lee. What is the proposed height? What kind of zoning variances will be sought? The proposed height is 50 feet. In terms of zoning variances, we'll be going through a 40B comprehensive permit process on this project. And quite honestly, we will be asking for a fair amount of relief from base zoning, but when you apply it against, say, the housing overlay that is pending in front of the city council, the setbacks in height that we're proposing are actually pretty close to what is proposed in that. But we will still need some relief. And then she goes on to ask, the first floor parking gives a blank wall along 2 frontages in a neighborhood that does not have the mode. Not sure what mode means there, but have you ever considered whether there's any other options to create better alternatives here? Well, actually the facade along Windsor is actually set back and provides a planting area. So that will actually be more of a green wall for people walking along that facade. And then in terms of the Broadway side, you know, there's a couple of openings. One is to get trash bins in and out easily, and the other is the garage door. So there isn't actually a lot of other space on Broadway to make those much different.
Can I say something?
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think has surprised me as we designed this building is that, you know, it actually is quite a small building. So actually, even the lobby, it takes up, you know, the wraps around the corner. In a building of this size, that'll have a lot of impact in terms of the street presence of the building and your experience on the corner and everything. But because otherwise, obviously, it would be nice to have more opportunity. It always is. But actually, that's a really important thing to realize, that this building is not 100 feet of facade. It's really a tight thing that is in the streetscape. It's no wider than a typical Cambridge residential lot, you know, in terms of the experience of the building. So anyway, just wanted to put that in there.
And it looks as if that question about the parking may have been from someone other than Lee. So I apologize if I didn't recognize who you were directly. So right now we do have one comment, not so much a question, but a comment from one of the people attending that does believe that the building is too big and too tall and too dense, which we do appreciate. You know, the sense in terms of your feedback on that. And you know, we've looked at this before, and we looked at what makes sense here in terms of an overall volume and a cost, and really where we find some conflict in doing something smaller is the general costs associated with providing that deck above the parking, because we have to keep parking on that ground floor, and then the elevator. You know, once we get above a 3rd floor, which is only 2 floors of housing, we're required to have an elevator, which is a very large expense. And honestly, that makes a lot more sense when you have the number of units that we have, and overall provides a cost per unit that fits with both the cities and some of our other funding sources requirements, because obviously there's sensitivity as to how much an affordable housing unit can cost, as to whether or not it's really feasible. And by cutting down the number of units and still having those very hard costs to even get the site to be buildable, it just makes it very hard to meet those thresholds. All right, we have another question. Is the parking lot on the other corner also for the closed building? And is it possible to move from some parking spots from Broadway lot to the other parking lot? Yes, the other parking lot is also part of the parking solution for the closed building. And I mentioned earlier that we had a plan to accommodate the existing parkers there both during construction and after construction. And part of that plan is to realign not realign as far as the number of spaces, but the usage of the parking spaces in that other lot. So right now, a lot of those spaces are tied to the management because our property managers are in that building. And we'll be moving them away from that to other spaces in our portfolio to open those up for residents of the closed building. And let's see, we have a question from Christopher. Is there any opportunity to create a publicly usable space on the roof, green or otherwise? Mark, do you want to talk about that one, the space capacity of the roof and what we could do there?
Yeah, I think that I love the idea. I think maybe this is not the building for it because by the time we've accommodated all of our mechanical requirements and the photovoltaic, the area, even if you took some of those, we're using all of the area now. And even if you took some of it away, which I think would be, contrary to some of the other goals of the project, I think that that there's a thing about, those kind of spaces, they need 2 means of egress, and there's all these kind of difficult code things and accessibility things and other stop on the elevator. So I think that that idea should be resurfaced in one of these larger lab style buildings or something, and that already exists a little bit in Kendall. It's not really appropriate for this small building, although the city is not, but I'm all for those kind of roof terraces. In the city, they generally have privacy problems, so it's also why you see them more often being allowed in the commercial areas and not in residential. So I'm sympathetic to the question, but I don't think it's viable on this site.
So we do have a question as to whether the residents inside the building will have access to parking. Right now, we're planning to have 8 parking spaces underneath the building. We are required, in order to use the lot at all, to reserve 6 of those for residents of the closed building. That leaves 2 spaces, one by building rule, or I forget exactly which rule it is, but one has to be a handicap accessible space, which cannot be assigned to any one person. And that leaves 1 other space. We've determined, based on the number of units there, that space is best used as a loading space, so a drop-off space, so people can come, drop off the kids so that they don't have to walk, and the other parent, drop off groceries, and a way to, not double park and clog up the street, but, have the convenience of being able to do something and get your stuff into your unit there. So we do, okay. We have another question. In the future, could we provide a view of the building from the street when there are no trees, or when the trees do not have leaves? Sorry, we're not taking down trees. That was a misspeech. When the trees do not have leaves, yes, we can take a look at providing that. All right. Another question is, if the elevator parking expense requires to go up so high, have you looked at other sites in the city? Yeah, we look at other sites in the city all the time. we have, my job at Just a Start is to find those sites and get them under contract. I believe I mentioned at the beginning that property values in Cambridge are exceptionally high. And it is difficult when we're talking affordable housing to compete with market rate developers. The affordable housing overlay will help that a great deal, but it doesn't exist yet, and it has not been something I've been able to utilize in my efforts to get properties under agreement. That being said, we did just get a development approved up at our 402 Ringe site for a couple of additional buildings using that parking lot. Again, leveraging property that's already owned in order to remove that cost from the overall equation. And we were also lucky enough to acquire a site on New Street next to the Dennehy Park behind the Whole Foods, where we'll be developing affordable housing there as well. Both of those will be rental projects, but we're sensitive to kind of the history of the port in East Cambridge and Wellington Harrington as being the place where all the affordable housing went. And by no means are we trying to perpetuate that. We are looking everywhere in the city to do affordable housing. That's, again, our mission. But when we have a parking lot that we do own, it is something that the city has really asked and stressed us to evaluate and try to do something with, because again, the need for affordable housing and the costs associated with buying property are so great. Let's see. We have a message from Dan. I think the building should be taller. It's 20 feet shorter than the close building, just on the opposite corner. So ideally, it would have another 2 stories. It would give us another 6 units. It's worth noting that the FAR of the close building is 5. Even a bigger building would very much fit within the character of the neighborhood. Thank you, Dan. We appreciate that, but one of the things we do, as having been in Cambridge for 52 years and part of this neighborhood, particularly with our first property purchase down at Linwood Court, is we would love to make as much affordable housing as possible, but we also have an obligation to make sure that it fits within and fits with the neighbors. So not maximizing every space is sometimes in theory a great idea, but necessarily in practicality one that would make it hard for us to move forward on other projects at sometimes. But I do appreciate the idea. It is interesting. I think some of the neighbors might disagree with you though. We have another question from Christopher. I think you mentioned 1 accessible unit on the top floor. Is that handicap disability accessible? Yes, it is. I know those spaces are very hard to find folks for. What is the differences that apply in the unit? What would be the trade-offs to create more such units?
Greg, maybe I can answer that maybe?
Yeah, that would be great, Mark.
Yeah, so, whenever you talk in Cambridge, you're talking to such an educated audience in general, but so those of you who are familiar will probably know that now in a building like this with an elevator, we'll design all of these buildings for basically what I call aging in place and universal access kind of standards, which means that all of the units in the building are really what they call adaptable, so that you should be able to continue to live there even if you develop some disability. And the difference with the accessible unit, it has slightly enhanced built-in requirements as opposed to ones that you could add if you needed them. So it has audio and a sort of different built-in different countertop heights and things like that. So the accessible unit is built to a higher standard of accessibility. Really, you have a problem with those, and it always is that you don't actually know what the disability might be. So it might be many, and it's hard to fully design for any of them. So you just have to design to the standard there. So the key is that the whole building really is designed for sort of aging in place or for being challenged and still being able to use the units. There's nothing that's going beyond the code requirements there, but we are happily obliged to design to those standards, and this building is designed that way.
Thanks, Mark. So we have another question from Alex. Are there options for moving those 6 parking spaces required for the closed building to an adjacent lot or another nearby location, such as Squirrel Brand? That's a concept that seems like it would be easy. However, when you start looking at the other buildings in our portfolio and the parking that they have, honestly, in order to allow for some other building to use that parking, we would actually have to go and ask for variance relief for those existing properties in order to have those parking spaces permanently allocated to the closed building. So in theory, you would think that's such an easy thing to do. However, zoning code makes it much more difficult to get something like that accomplished. Even if, for example, not all the spaces were being used at one of those properties, it still would require us to go in front of the zoning board and ask for relief. From Lee, will these drawings be posted on Corbinized website separately from the presentation? It's easier to enlarge drawings in PDF than in a presentation. That is a good question. I think that is something that we can do. And a comment from Lee, I want to express support for the building being home ownership rather than rental, which is much desired in the port. And comment from Dan, there's precedent for having a 70-foot building next to a 35-foot building, again, the closed building. And he provides a link, which I will not open here, but when we post our recap of the questions and answers, I will include where that link went in that posting. And we have one more question about why is there no parking for the owners? There's no parking for the owners other than the accessible space and the kind of loading space because of the requirements for the close building. In order for us to be develop this property at all, the lenders and investors in that building, because we recently renovated it, require a certain amount of parking be available. And the lowest amount that they would allow us to lose out of 12 spaces was 6. So at a minimum, we have to provide them 6 spaces, which also means at a minimum, we have to not have housing on the first floor, just based on driveway and space like that. So that's a requirement from the existing owner of the property and their lenders and investors. Unfortunately, that's not something we're going to be able to move away from. There really isn't another way to add additional parking, either going down or going up, because you lose so much space with ramps and driveways and things of that nature, and the site is just far too small to accommodate anything like that. Let's see. The comment is a cross-section drawing showing the neighboring wood frame residential building would be a good view to have. When you compare it to Fletcher Maynard and Close, yes, of course, it looks okay, but when you compare it to the neighboring wood frame structures, it's simply too big. I appreciate that comment. That is also a view that we can work on creating and also provide. I think right now that's all of the current questions. We still have a little bit of time, so if anybody has some additional comments or things of that nature that they'd like to continue on with? We have one additional comment. Also making the statement that this person would like us to consider making the building smaller. Again, we appreciate those comments just as much as we appreciate the other ones. And, you know, it's something that we take seriously, and we'll go back and put our heads together and see what we can do to, you know, reanalyze the building as much as we can. And, you know, if not necessarily making it smaller, but, you know, maybe there's some design tricks that, you know, might make it look a little less, you know, create some massing differences that that make it look that way. We also have another question from Christopher. The building overall looks good, and I appreciate the design and how you've integrated it into the street. Thank you. And a comment from Dan. I'd like to second the comment that it's a great, these are homeownership units. I just feel like it's a missed opportunity to not have more when there's clearly the ability to build higher. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Christopher. All right, looks like we are out of questions and comments again. So still have kind of 10 minutes left on what we thought we might go to, but by all means, we do not have to sit around here and stare at small screens. I'm sure we do enough of that during the day. So I'll ask one more time if there's any last questions or comments, and if not, then we will sign off. So give it a minute or two just to have it filter through.
So, Greg?
Mark.
It's my first of these. Thank you for being the host, Greg. And thanks for all the participants. It's difficult not to see you, and I would love the opportunity post-COVID to be a little bit more human about this process. I just would like to say that from me personally as a very non-techie guy. So anyway, thanks for everybody coming on.
Yes, and it looks as if we don't have any more comments. So I will echo Mark's statement there in terms of thanking everybody for coming out. As I said, I'm sure you're doing enough of these on a normal everyday basis during the day, and getting back online and looking at these pictures and our project and providing your feedback. We greatly appreciate it. And let's see, oh, we did have one. Oh, thought we had another section, another one, but what is, okay, we do have one more question that came in at the end here. What's the plan for establishing connection to the park next to the lot? Is that going to be a direct connection from the garage space? No, we will not have a direct connection from the garage space. We'll still have people exiting the front door or the garage door, and accessing the park along Broadway. And then we have someone who joined late saying, please post so that we can watch it later. And Moira, yes, sorry you did join late. We've been recording this. We will post the recording of the entire presentation in the meeting, as well as a recap of the questions and answers that came up. So, but thank you for signing in right here at the end. And with that, I'm going to, again, say thank you very much for everybody coming and your participation and your comments. We do greatly appreciate it. As I said, we'll post this along with the questions and answers. And I also hope that someday in the future, we'll we'll all be allowed to have a meeting like this in person. And but until then, we'll continue on having conversations through the CoUrbanize site, which again is www.courb.co/BP for Broadway Park, as well as additional community meetings and online community meetings and conversations of the like. So with that, thank you again and good night.
Good night.